human and material. How many of you are talking on your jobs about, in your day jobs about workforce development and skills gaps? This is an issue for folks, right? So there's a lot of uncertainty in the world, and by using research, we can reduce it as much as we can and mitigate the adverse effects of not knowing. So some of the tools we use as marketers, as business people, to predict what's going on, to predict how our customers might receive information are forecasts, right? How many of you use forecasts? Hands up. I told you I need some interaction up here. So forecasts are great, right? They give us an idea of what to expect, but they are at best forecasts, right? So let's assume that our forecast is reliable 75% of the time. What about the other 25%? What if we could work together to harness information that's available to us and make the most of 100% of that data? It's an intriguing thought, right? So I know that it's debatable in history whether or not this gentleman actually said this. I'm going to go with it for pop culture's sake. I like the slide. But the idea of doing something over and over again is it's terrible. It's insane. I think it's his favorite definition of insanity. It works every time. It won't work. So as a marketer, I spend a lot of time looking at other people's marketing communications programs. As business people, you probably do the same. And something I observe a lot of the time is sameness. I see a lot of copycat marketing out in the world. I see somebody run a digital ad campaign, and I see their competitor run the exact same campaign. And what I think in my mind is probably someone sitting behind the desk, being very diligent, doing social listening, doing analysis, and thinking, well, if it worked for them, why not me? Maybe you thought, well, maybe it would work for me. Well, maybe, but maybe not. I would argue that if you function this way from a marketing standpoint, how can you possibly ever measure progress if you don't actually know where you began? So I want to tell you a little story here, and you're seeing caterpillars on the screen and thinking, whoa, what is this? What are we talking about here? Well, it's an interesting story about a French scientist called Jean-Henri Fabre. Anyone familiar with Jean-Henri? No reason you would be. So he studied caterpillar behavior. He had this idea. He was going to test the force of habit. And so he got these little caterpillars, and he enticed them up around the top of a flower pot. And he strung them together, and he started them walking, right? He put some pine needles in the flower pot because that's their favorite food, evidently. And he assumed that after time, those caterpillars would figure out that they're going nowhere fast, right? We're just going around in circles, that they would stop to eat, that they would change direction. And what do you think happened? They didn't. They just kept going around in circles to the point where some of them collapsed. Now, this is a terribly sad story, I'm sure in some ways, but there's a big lesson here, right? These caterpillars confused activity with accomplishment. So they did stuff, they did what they had been doing for the last several days, hoping to achieve something different, and instead they just fell over. We don't want to be the caterpillar that falls over, do we? I don't want to be. So speaking of falling over, why are reasons that marketing might fail? Anyone want to be the person who raises his or her hand and talks about why marketing might fail? Not listening to your customers. Great answer. Other reasons.
Not understanding your audience.
Absolutely.
Not having anything to say, but say it anyway.
Absolutely. Thank you for that one. Yes. How many of you have been in the room with a boss or an agency or a colleague, and you've asked, well, why would we do that? And their answer was, well, it's just gut. I just know. We know our customers. Has that ever happened to anyone? No one? Never happened, right? How many of you had made marketing decisions based on what you think your boss expects? No one in this room has done that, I get it, but theoretically, you can imagine it happening, right? How many of you have made decisions too quickly or not quickly enough? Here again, not in this room, but you can imagine this concept, right? In the case of our sad little caterpillars, we do find ourselves as human beings making decisions based on habit, force of habit. Marketing is exactly the same way. Whether you buy media because you've bought the same media for 10 years and you haven't really stopped to think, is this still the right media for me? Maybe you haven't bought the media. Maybe you've relied only on social media for the last couple of years. The point is, research is a punctuation mark to get us to stop, drop, and consider, right? So that we don't have these epic failures that in some cases have a very negative effect on the budget. So speaking of epic failures, how many of you remember this? Any Gap shoppers in the room?